Today, I'll be recapping the Paris Marathon. It is my marathon debut, and what better city than the City of Lights? I'll be covering the race from the very beginning, from signups all the way until post-race. I signed up for the race back in September of 2022 during the early bib registration period. And during this period, the price was 110 euros. It's not a lottery system. You just sign up and you're good to go. I did get the insurance just in case I got injured, and that was an additional 12 euros. Overall, it was an easy process. Just something to note. Not sure if it's unique to France, but at least in France, when you do race a marathon, you do need to upload a medical certificate. So prior to racing, you must make an appointment for a physical and upload that certificate. And then in the event that you don't get to upload it as you leave, you can go in person and present your medical certificate. So just something to note, that when you're also traveling, do bring that copy with you just in case. My preferred method of arriving in Paris is by train when possible, just because the train does take you to the center of town and it connects immediately to the metro system. Flying into CDG, it is connected by RER Train B, just designated by the color blue. And that takes about, to the center of Paris, it's about 45 minutes to get there. And if you're going into the Orly airport, you do have to take a designated Orly-Val tram, which also connects you to the RERB in the south, and that its total trip time is also roughly around 40 minutes. The Expo does open a few days before the race, usually on Thursday. We ended up picking up our bib on a Friday. It's a relatively easy process. We didn't find the lines to be too long. And we probably waited in line to get into the place about 20 minutes at the most, just kind of zigzagging through the lines. And there is a security check. It started to rain right as we were getting in. So I think they were also speeding up as quickly as possible. That way people didn't get soaked. And that is going to be off of the Porte de Versailles metro stop, off of line 12 or tram 3. We ended up staying near Madeleine, which is off of line 12. So from that kind of city center, Paris can be around 25 minutes, but depending on where you are, it is kind of on the outskirts of Paris. So if you're on the opposite end of town, it might be around 40 minutes to get there. So it's something to consider when booking hotels where you want to stay at. Madeleine, additionally, is relatively close to the start line and finish line. Going through the Expo, it was a pretty fun experience. It's my first major Expo. So you start off by picking up your bib, and it is pretty neatly organized. As I mentioned earlier, you do need a medical certificate. If you didn't get to upload your medical certificate beforehand, you can provide it to someone in person. Being that it is such a massive race, this I believe had 52,000 registered runners. There you are going to have people who do speak multiple languages, and there were some booths where I saw from Spanish, German, English, and French. So navigating, I found it to be pretty easy. Here we are at the Paris Convention, or Paris Marathon Convention. Brother got his bib. After picking up your bib, they do provide you with a pretty neat backpack or running vest. I did see a lot of people on Marathon Race Day with this, so if you are someone that does want to run with a vest and kind of have your own water bottle or water bladder, but don't want to bring your backpack along with your suitcase, you will get one. It's pretty lightweight, pretty minimal. I didn't run with it on my race day, but my brother did, and he had no complaints in regards to comfort. After you collect your bib, there is quite a few activities you can do at the Expo. There is a wall where they have the names of all the registered runners, so it's kind of cool to go up there and find your name. They had a model of a cardboard kind of cutout of the Arc de Triomphe you can take pictures of, as well as just a lot of really, really cool picture opportunities. I was initially looking forward to them, but I didn't end up taking any photos just because of the lines. While this is my first marathon and I did want to do as much of the activities as possible, even without the pictures, I did end up spending at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in there. The Paris Marathon was sponsored by ASICS, and so there is a kind of dedicated section to them. And in this hall, you could try out some of their running shoes. At least when we arrived, if you wanted someone that spoke in French, the wait time was about 15 minutes. For someone that speaks English or potentially other languages, at least for English, it was an hour wait. I do speak French, so I did end up going with the French line. My wife did end up doing the English, so that took about an hour wait. And they did a little bit of run gait analysis on there. I was initially excited to try out a variety of shoes from ASICS, from the Metaspeed and Nova Blast, but just given the time that you had to wait for them, I just ended up trying on the Gel Nimbus 25 again and doing my run gait analysis that way. I always enjoy those types of things. It's really cool seeing an analysis of how you step, hearing someone kind of give you feedback on which leg you might favor. And again, they would have like a little bit of a track section where you could try out some of the other shoes. In terms of the Paris swag, there was anything that particularly caught my attention besides the Gel Nimbus 25 Paris edition. I already had a pair of Gel Nimbus 25, so I did not want to purchase that. Moving on to the other side of the hall, so you are going to find other vendors from Hoka's or Adidas. But there was a lot of running apparel, both local and startups. So that was kind of cool. I myself didn't purchase anything in particular, but my wife got a sports bra and my brother got a couple of gels to try out for a later date. So again, if you also forget some gels, my brother actually ended up forgetting his gels back here in the States. So he managed to get a couple of used, which is what he normally runs with. So he lucked out in that way, and one-stop shop for everything. My original plan was to relax as much as possible the day before the race. Unfortunately, just being in Paris, it is a beautiful city and it's really easy to get caught up in sightseeing. We ended up staying out from like 10 a.m. and we probably didn't get back home until 7 p.m. So a little bit longer than I anticipated. I was hoping to be back home and chilling out around 4 and having a really, really early dinner around 5. So I had dinner around 7 o'clock, and I usually have some sort of fish with like potatoes and some really easy to digest greens the night before. And I let my brother choose the restaurant, and he ended up choosing a like steakhouse. So when we ended up arriving there wasn't much of a fish option. So I ended up getting a T-bone steak. Luckily, I was a little extra, and I was like, please give me the cut of meat that has the least amount of fat in it. And so actually ended up eating it and digesting it fine. I was a little bit concerned, but come the morning of the race, wasn't an issue. I think dinner, like I said, was probably around 7, maybe a little bit earlier. So it wasn't too big of a deal. So the night before the race, I ended up laying out my kit, and I ended up running, going from top to bottom. I ended up running with the CLE hat. It is one of my favorite running hat companies. Love their gear. I probably have a little bit too many of their hats. Ended up going with a white. My racing colors tend to be orange just because it's nice and bright and you can, family can see me out there. And I was going to wear my Roka running sunglasses. Ended up being a overcast, cloudy day, so I actually scrapped it right before the race. Running with some AirPods in transparency mode, low volume, and I definitely wanted to, in moments of the race where there wasn't too much crowd support, definitely wanted to get lost in the music, and then additionally wanted some alerts from the stride, but I also definitely wanted to hear the crowd, which I had no problem with in transparency mode. For the top, I used the Nike Aero Swift singlet. I love this singlet. It's perforated, so a lot of the air does flow through, and I am someone that tends to like being pretty cool while racing, and so just having that breathability, love it. For shorts, I ended up wearing my John G 5-inch AFO middle shorts. John G is probably my favorite running shorts company. I've had a couple of different versions over the years. One of the earlier ones was perforated, which I also absolutely love. But these ones are absolutely great. These ones are not perforated, which just given the weather was perfectly fine. The back pocket is large enough to fit a phone, and I ended up putting 6 gels in there. Minimal bounce when you have that much weight. Yeah, normally for half marathons I carry 2, and there's like no bounce at all. So I absolutely love these shorts, and the weight felt fine, comfortable waistband, and I have no chafing issues whatsoever in the 5-inch shorts. I also have a pair of 3-inch shorts, which I tried running in. Personally, I chafe in them, but if you're someone that does like the short shorts, definitely give those a try. I do like wearing those for shorter races. From 5K max at, I haven't done a 10K race, but when I do 10K time trials, I do bust out those 3-inch shorts. Additionally, I have KT tape that I use along my IT band. I've had IT band issues in the past. Additionally, I do have weak hips. I'm not quite sure how much benefit I actually am getting from it, but just having that on there, probably placebo effect, I just feel pretty comfortable with them. Additionally, I am also wearing CEP compression calf sleeves. I have previously had a calf strain, and so I like wearing that for additional security. For socks, I wore my Injinji toe socks, and these ones were my lightweight ones. I also get a couple of blisters, and ever since wearing Injinji toe socks for long runs or for racing, I haven't had any issues. I just love how each toe is individually wrapped, so I've never had any issues with being cold, nor in terms of just feeling sweaty in between the toes. So I absolutely love my toe socks. For the shoes, I ended up going with the Nike Vaporfly Next% 2, orange of course, and I had a Stride foot pod on there, and to kind of check my power throughout the race, as well as my speed and cadence. For my hands, I ended up wearing these Gorewear running gloves, pretty thin, but definitely helps reduce, usually my extremities are the ones that get cold, my ears. I did start off with also a Icebreaker merino wool headband, pretty thin, but keeps the wind out. I ended up taking that off about two miles into the race because I ended up just quickly heating up. It was a little bit humid that day. And then finally an Apple Watch 4. Normally the morning of a race, I eat a bagel with cream cheese and smoked salmon. And I had a difficult time trying to find bagels in France. So the morning of the Paris Marathon, I did end up having just a croissant, 2 croissants with some strawberry jam. And don't think those caused any issues later on in the race. It wasn't too hard to get to the start line. As I mentioned, we were staying in Madeleine, which is a few metro stops away from the start line. So we ended up getting there without much of an issue, and didn't find that it was too much traffic. It was pretty easy. We ended up getting to see the women's start, as well as the wheelchair start. And so that was kind of really cool to see. I also got to see the elite men start. I was additionally registered for the 8:45 corral. If you do want to update your corral start time, you can do so when you arrive. You can do so by emailing them way in advance. Once they print out the bib, you do have to do it in person. It isn't a major deal. Just tell them which corral you want to be placed in. So I moved up from the 3:45 to the 3:30. Since giving a pretty good half marathon time, Stride predicted I can run between 3:31 plus or minus 5 minutes. So I wanted to go for that 3:30. If you do want to move up in a corral that is faster than 3 hours in the preferred section, you will have to bring proof of a previous certified race. Once you get into the corral, they do have some of these outdoor urinals, as well for women, kind of these closed off ones. And while initially lining up for it, it was just a little bit weird that there was no walls or anything. I easily got over that. I think everyone's just so focused in the race. That kind of goes away really quickly. And in previous races, just wanting to use the bathroom before a race has always been a hassle. I've either had to wait like 30 minutes in line, or I see a long line and I just freak out and I just avoid the bathroom altogether. It took me about 10 minutes to wait in line, and then afterwards I had about 20 minutes still before I actually got going. So that was very good experience for me, and I think that most races should have that. It's just pretty rad. I didn't warm up before. Being that it was a long race, I definitely wanted to conserve as much energy as possible. I stretched that morning, and then just kind of doing a couple more additional stretches while our corral area was moving up towards the start line. Right as I got to the start line, I look to my left and I see my family, my brother, mom, and wife cheering me on. Cheering crowd there. I was really in the zone and really focused, and just seeing them, it just brought on a bunch of emotions. It just really hit me like I am in for quite something in a few moments, and just seeing them support me was just something very special, and I'm just so happy that I got to see them at the beginning as well as a few sections down the line. It is very well organized, the start time. So aside from the corrals being divided up, it starts at the Champs-Élysées, and it is divided into 2 sections. So the waves go off by 1, and then about a minute later, they release the next wave. And so even though you do have like a 3:30 corral, within each corral, you do have separate waves going off. And we're off. First marathon on the Champs-Élysées. Taking it easy at the beginning, staying on the edges. This is just amazing. Weeks of hard work, going for 3:30. Let's get this. Once the start line started, we were off, and the first about half mile or first kilometer of the race is slightly downhill, and it is also on cobblestone. So aside from just in general wanting, to start a race, especially a marathon, slow, do note that it is slightly downhill, cobblestone. You want to kind of be mindful of those stones. You don't, it is uneven ground. I personally didn't find that to be much of a major issue, but again, kind of keep that in mind. According to my Stride, that first mile came in roughly at around 8:30, which was perfect. I was aiming for 3:30, so I needed about an 8-minute average pace. So I didn't want that very first mile to be just controlled. I didn't want to do a lot of weaving and zigzagging through people. And I just wanted to kind of get calm my nerves into that race. All right, just past the 5K mark. 25 minutes, so roughly a little slower than 8 minutes a mile, which is great. I wanted to take that first segment pretty easily. Kind of use it as a warm-up as well. This is
because I did stretch and did a couple of movements beforehand, but wanted to rest up for the race, so slightly behind schedule, but that's according to plan. So trying to avoid swimming through people and maneuvering. So I'm gonna take theirs up. I'll try to pick up the pace. Let's do this.
So I ended up crossing that 5K mark at 25 minutes and 7 seconds. So a little bit slower than goal race pace, which was perfect. I wanted to take that 5K a little bit slower. You start off by running down the Champs-Élysées, past Place de la Concorde, Place de Vendôme, and into the Paris Opera. And from there, you continue on into passing the Louvre. It was kind of just the best of Paris right at the first 5K, and just amazing. In addition to taking things slowly, that way you don't pay for it later in the race, take time to appreciate those sights. That's probably the most exciting part of the race in terms of sightseeing, along with the Eiffel Tower. And so just wonderful experiencing all that. Crowd support was great right at the beginning. I've never been in a race this big, and just seeing that crowd of people just cheering you on, I felt like a champion already, and the race had just begun. Something else to note about this race that I didn't properly train for, most races that I've done here have had a aid station about every 2 miles. In this case, it was every 5K, roughly a little over 3 miles. So that kind of threw a little wrench in my nutrition plan, where normally what I do is I skip the first aid station, and then at the second aid station, the 4 mile mark, I drink some water along with a gel. And then the next 2 miles, just water. And the next 2 miles on mile 8, I do water plus gel. Given that it was 3, I had to make a decision between skipping that in terms of gel or taking it early. I opted for taking it early just because I knew that this was a long race and that might come in handy later. So I took my gel and my water right at mile 3. And one thing I absolutely love is that they ended up handing these out in individual water bottles. I have such a difficult time drinking out of those cups. I practice, and even then I can never get all the water in. It spills everywhere. Having a water bottle, it's already opened, so you get to calmly just run with it. It fits wonderfully in your hand. You get to sip it, and along the course, they're really big on being green, and they have a large amount of green waste bins. So, and they kind of have little even bullseyes you can throw into and kind of play a game. And so getting rid of them was pretty easy. Moving on to the second 5K, by the 10K mark, you would have already passed the Hotel de Ville, Bastille, and you're quickly approaching the edges of the main principal ring around Paris, Porte d'Oreille.
All right, just past the 10K mark. 20 miles to go. God, let's not think about that. 50 minutes and 40-ish seconds, so all right, I think can't do math right now, but a little bit below, but that's fine. Still got a long way to go. Trying to pick up the pace, slight downhill up ahead, so should be good. Let's do it.
At this point, you do start hitting a little bit of a slight uphill. It's a little bit definitely noticeable. You get to see it from a distance, so it's a great opportunity to kind of back off. My second split ended up coming in at 25:18, so for a total time of 50 minutes and 25 seconds. So my second split came in slightly slower than my first one, which was a little worrisome, but overall I still wanted to maintain that first half slower than my second half. And again, there was a little bit of a uphill in that, so it kind of negates that. At the second 10K mark, I also took my second gel. I wanted to initially take my Goo sea salt chocolate, followed by my Huma strawberry banana, and then followed back by Goo Sea Salt Chocolate, and then followed by Huma all the way the rest of the race. Because I had my GoPro in one hand and then sometimes I had to get a water bottle right before, it was pretty difficult opening up my back pocket. Trying to get a gel out was a little bit of a hassle, and then I just ended up grabbing whichever one I grabbed. And my first gel was a Huma, which was not as planned, and then my second gel was also a Huma, which was not planned. I really wanted that additional caffeine in the Goo Roctane, but alas, I didn't. I've done both throughout my training, and I didn't think that messing up the order was going to cause too much harm. So going into the Bois de Vincennes, it is a forested area, and some of the comments and reviews of this race do find the forested areas a bit of an issue, just because you do have less crowd support and they can seem a little endless. Personally, for the first forested section, I did not find that to be the case. While yes, the crowds do diminish and you do have less support there, I actually found that bit of solitude very nice to have. I got to focus in on the music, and rather than be distracted by some of the music and musicians and the crowds cheering, I got to really focus on my cadence, got to focus on my breathing technique, and really just focusing on getting through the next section of the race. So you're in that section roughly around 10 kilometers. About halfway through, right before the 15-kilometer mark, you are hitting the Chateau de Vincennes. So that little section, which is nice. It cuts the forested section in half, more or less. In that section, you are going to have some additional crowd support. So if you are someone that does need that, you can look forward to that. And personally, I found that section to be very pleasant. And that section ended up, the 10 to 15 kilometer section ended up coming in at 24:51. So a little bit faster than marathon paced. And so great overall. My time at that point was 1 hour, 15 minutes, and 16 seconds. Next 5K came in at 24:39. And then at the halfway mark, ended up coming in at 1:45:21. So really surprised when I looked down at my watch. I was picking up the pace again, and I was just so excited that I felt what I had ran the perfect first half of that marathon. I felt great, and I was really getting ready to really step up and try to pick up the pace a little bit. At this point, you're entering back into Paris, and I even got to pass my old apartment when I used to live in Paris during my summer abroad there. That section is mostly downhill up until you get back to the Bastille. So it's your second time hitting that monument.
About 14 and a half miles in. I'm struggling now. Let's see if I can dig deep in, get some motivation.
And immediately after passing the 25-kilometer mark, that section at that point was 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 59 seconds. At this point, I started having some issues with my feet where I had tightened my shoes a little too tight. So right above my ankle, it was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I didn't want to stop. I just felt that if I stopped, that would really throw off my pacing for that. So it was starting to bother me, but it wasn't anything too substantial at this point. So I just kind of continued on with the race. The first half of the section, which is right along the river, is really flat. You have immense crowd support. And so at this section, my approach to this was kind of gather yourself together. Really, I ended up hitting like a power up button. And so just having that crowd support really pushed me through that section. Kind of try to recover a little bit. It's completely flat. And this is up until you get into the tunnel. There is a tunnel there that was formerly a freeway. And again, having run before, I knew that it is sneaky uphill. And then there is quite a substantial uphill coming out of that. So I definitely took it a little bit easier. And coming into that, out of that uphill, that's when it really hit me. Even though I've already had some hills earlier in the course that weren't too bad. I think the incline was a little bit steeper, just because they were shorter, and it's just going under bridges, and that's the part that got to me. And I think right around mile 18 is when I really started to struggle there.
Struggling here. Energy is really zapped. Hit the wall probably around mile 15. I don't know. I hope I can recover.
30-kilometer mark. This comes out to 26 minutes and 31 seconds. The underpasses going down and going up really demoralized me. I tried to pick up the speed once again, and I think I started having issues with my hamstrings where I just had a difficult time really lifting my legs up. Nonetheless, I try to persist as much as possible, and the last ramp, you get to see the Eiffel Tower pretty close up, so that's motivating, and you kind of get a little bit of a second win. The crowd section in this is phenomenal. You're gonna get a lot of cheering, and it's, you know, one of the world's most iconic structures, and just the energy around is great. There's some DJs playing music right around you right before you get to that section, so that kind of amps you up a little bit. Then you cross the Burkham-Keene Bridge, where you also have additional crowd support. That is the bridge that does appear on Inception. So that's kind of the final section where you have immense crowd support, and you get a little bit of a second win. At this point, I knew I was slowing down, and one thing, just because of where I started, kind of more in the middle of my wave, the pacers were a bit ahead of me, and at this point, I think the wave behind me started to pass me because someone with a 3:30 flag started passing me. At this point, I kind of figured I didn't have the 3:30 marathon in the books, but seeing that it was a second wave, I kind of did some math where maybe they might have started a minute or two before me, where maybe if I held on to this group through the rest of the race, maybe towards the end I have a final push that I can really come through and get as close as possible to that 3:30. So I started running in behind that group, and for as much as I tried, I just lost them as well. And so at this point, I've kind of shifted my goal, and I shifted from 3:30 to hopefully I can get under 3:35. I figured there was going to be other waves of 3:30 pace groups running behind me. So I figured I'll just rest up as much as possible and then try to catch on with them. From 30 to 35, the crowds start to dwindle out as you kind of leave the city center. And additionally, most of the people that are there for supporting other runners, since it's so it's closer to the end of the race, they tend to head towards the finish line. So they start dwindling down, and there's additionally no major touristy sites that kind of get you excited. And so it does get a little bit boring, and it's also a little bit slightly uphill. At this point in the race, as I mentioned, I tightened my shoes a little bit too tight. It is starting to bother me. And in retrospect, I should have stopped and loosened up my shoelaces, but I just had a fear of just completely stopping and just killing all momentum that I wrongfully pushed through that pain. It was to the point where I ignored the pain, but I actually ended up feeling the residual soreness of that 2 days after the race. So that was definitely an error on my side. Additionally, after passing the Eiffel Tower, where kind of that excitement dies off, I felt something that I never felt before in my long runs or in a half marathon race. And that's the bottom of my feet really becoming exhausted. And I'm not quite sure if this is because this is the furthest distance I've ever gone, or I'm personally chalking it up to just doing a lot of sightseeing before. The best way I can describe that feeling is you just spend an entire day at Disneyland and your feet, the bottoms of your feet are just exhausted. That's what I felt like. And so I just felt a little defeated at this point where I really started to slow down, and I just started kind of going over the regrets of just like, I shouldn't have sightseen as much. I should have rested up some more. And then additionally, as I mentioned, I did the wrong order of my gels for one. And then two, in half marathons, I've done 3 gels before in that, and that felt like too much. So then I dropped it down to 2. I think at this point I've already consumed 4 gels, and I was about to, passing the 30-kilometer mark, I was going to take my 5th gel. But my stomach was just not happy with that amount of gels. I think that during my training, I think I'd done a maximum of 4 gels. There was this one video that commented that they usually don't eat before running, and that is actually something that I do. I do run fasting. Not having any meals before a race, just over the last few years, my body has probably gotten accustomed to that, where I probably need less gels during a race than other runners might. I think that's something I did learn from this race, is maybe the next race only take 4 gels rather than take as many gels as possible. So at this point, I ended up just skipping that 5th gel for now and just running 30 to 35 kilometers, trying to recover as best as possible. You really could see a significant drop here, where most paces were roughly around 25 minutes. This split came in at 29:43, so a significant drop. At this point, I'm just exhausted. I want it to be over with. Crossing the 35-kilometer mark, I tried doing some marathon math in my head, where knowing 10 kilometers is 6 miles, I figured 7 kilometers is roughly around 5 miles, where if I can kind of pick up the pace again, I can maybe get like a roughly 40 minutes, 3:42-ish. So I figured if I can just kind of keep that pace, and obviously I'm rounding up, maybe I can get under that 3 hours and 40 minutes at this point. Unfortunately, just that 35 to 40 kilometer, at that section, you are entering the second forest, which is the Bois de Boulogne. And this section was rerouted from previous years. This section used to be more on the forest in previous years, which a lot of runners reviewed said that was their least favorite part. It felt endless. And even though it's considerably shorter, at this point, you're just exhausted that you want as much support as possible. And so it just felt empty once again. You felt alone in your thoughts. And you saw other people breaking. I saw so many people, not so many people, but I saw a good number of runners just jogging, walking. Some of them were just laying down on the floor with cramps, and you just see the pain of some people and the emotion of some people just trying to get through this thing. And while there's some solidarity in that, it's also a little bit discouraging. We're like, okay, we're all suffering. This is all suffering. And so right around the 35-kilometer mark, I do decide to take that 5th gel, hoping that with 7 kilometers left, it will give me enough of a boost to kind of get through. Upon hitting the 40-kilometer mark, that, as much as I wanted to pick up the pace, the combination of my feet feeling tired and my shoelaces being super tight, my hamstring was feeling really tight, and just feeling completely discouraged, that split came in at 33:21. So there were segments of that I was running considerably slow. Towards the end of that section, probably around kilometer 39, you are re-entering the city portion of Paris. And this is where I wasn't too happy with the race. The streets start to either narrow, or the way that they allowed the crowd really started to narrow. Up until this point, I felt that the streets were very wide to maneuver, and just having it really narrow, you had a lot of people just really slowing down. And along with narrow streets, it made it really difficult to pass or try to pick up the pace. So I was just sticking to the ride and being ridiculously slow. So that I crossed that 40 kilometer with the previous split of 33 minutes and 21 seconds. One thing I did enjoy about the signs being in kilometers rather than miles is I get to further break down the race. At the 40 kilometer mark, just seeing that 4 and knowing that a race is 42.2, I got a second life in that. And additionally, right at the 40 kilometer mark, it kind of just peaks and then it kind of goes downhill. And one thing too is that your bib has your name on it. And so throughout the race, strangers were shouting my name. Right at the 40 kilometer mark, someone did also shout my name, Go Eduardo Ale. And that also really, really, really motivated me.
Really struggling here. Just 2 kilometers left. Trying to get every ounce of heart I can to finish this thing. My feet hurt. God, I just wanted to be over with.
So I started picking up the pace again. About 3 minutes before crossing the finish line, my watch died. I started getting alerts on my earphones that my watch was about to die. So I also tried picking it up as fast as possible to try to not only track, but just to kind of see where I was. Kilometer 40 to 41, I picked up the pace. It was probably around 9 minutes a mile. And then seeing 41, I have 1 more kilometer left. And before I knew it, I saw the 350 meter mark. And I must have missed the 500 meter sign somehow. But all of a sudden, it's just like, oh, wow, this is less than 2 laps on a track. I can do this. And so I really picked up the pace as much as possible and try to dash through. After the 40 kilometer mark, it is downhill, especially at that very end. So I'm really trying to push as fast as possible to the end. Just given that the last 20 or so kilometers, I've been pretty much jogging, I was just going to go for an all-out sprint. Unfortunately, again, as I was mentioning moments ago, it was pretty narrow, that it was pretty difficult to pass up until the last 200 where it opens up once again. Rather than going an all-out sprint, really wanted to enjoy the moment. All I kept thinking about was I just wanted to hug my wife. I wanted to hug my family and really just get to this finish line area, and it's just, the energy is immense. While I'm trying to run with the camera and trying to keep that steady, I'm just trying to take it all in and appreciate all of it up until the finish line. So I didn't want to go on an all-out sprint. I just wanted to savor that moment. Crossing the finish line is one of the most indescribable feelings I've had. I was not expecting it, and I was just overwhelmed with joy that I started crying. I did not anticipate that to happen.
Écoute, ce que je peux te dire, c'est que c'est les derniers
Months and months of training coming down to this moment and completing it. I was very proud of myself. As I mentioned, my watch had died, so I had no idea at this point what my time was. I just didn't care. Whatever my time was, I finished it. And I was just so proud of myself. So my final time was 3 hours, 47 minutes, and 23 seconds for an average pace of 5 minutes and 22 seconds per kilometer. Converting that to minutes per mile, that ends up being roughly 8 minutes and 37 seconds per mile. So yeah, definitely not 3:30, but overall I'm pretty happy with that. I ended up purchasing a poster of the course route that will also have my time etched on it. And while my initial feelings on that was just disappointment, I've since evolved on those emotions, and I'm going to take it as just kind of like this benchmark where a solid time and looking to beat that every single time going forward. up until I obviously physically can't do so no more. Upon completing the race, you get your medal and finisher shirt. This year's medal, I call it a donut or a bagel. Pretty cool, I'd say. And it has a little bit more of an abstract Arc de Triomphe on it. I've never been more proud of a medal than this one, and I'm going to really cherish this for a long time. Additionally, at the finish line, they did have a lot of food there, from some bread, snacks, bananas, and at the end of the finish line, I actually felt pretty ill. As I mentioned, I had taken 5 gels at this point, and I just felt like throwing up. I luckily didn't, but I think going forward to the next race, I will only be doing 4 gels. Additionally, while I love my John G shorts, absolutely love them, I think running with the GoPro and trying to get my gels was a little bit too much. I'm going to try out running half tights where they have pockets on the sides where I can quickly differentiate which gel is which, and it's going to be a little bit of an easier access. Next day recovery wasn't so bad. We had to catch a flight at around noon. I would highly recommend you leave as early as possible. We ended up leaving right around 8:30 for a noon flight. I would try to leave a little bit earlier because even with that much of a leeway, it took about an hour to get to the airport. And then crossing through securities, my wife and my mom both got randomly picked for additional security check. So that was some additional time. If you're flying with a US passport, there is kind of like a little bit of a fast pass. So that was actually really easy for us. My mom was flying with a different passport, so that also took some time. So keep that in mind when traveling. And so I would probably leave for the airport 4 hours, maybe 4.5 hours beforehand, just to be on the safe side. We ended up getting to our gate probably like 30 minutes to 40 minutes before takeoff. So a little bit closer than what I wanted to for an international flight, but overall wasn't bad. And then I didn't feel too tired, as having, I guess, an advantage of blowing up during a marathon is you're not as exhausted. Bottom of my feet were a little bit tender, but nothing too bad. My brother also felt similarly, and that's just because I really drilled into his head, take it easy in the first half. And his splits were for the first half, were pretty even, nothing too above his effort pace. He also started struggling in some of those tunnel sections. And then towards the end, he got a little bit of upwind. So similar trajectory as me, a little bit more even than I did. But he said that, passing the Eiffel Tower, he also saw a lot of people just on the side of the roads who definitely blew up harder. And so he wanted to avoid that and took those sections easier up until the very end where he knew he can finish off strong. So yeah, we didn't have too much issue with the recovery, even days after. I've had half marathons where I felt more exhausted. Granted, that's probably because we were running a little closer to threshold in those half marathons versus we were running in a more aerobic heart rate in that. Overall, my experience of the Paris Marathon from the organization perspective was pretty great. I think that the only major complaints are I wish they widened the streets a little bit more towards the end of the race, maybe having some barriers for crowd to be a little bit more spaced out. And then I know that several runners complained about that, about being more strict about people in corrals that they shouldn't be in. And I think some of it is founded, but some of it is also not, just because I myself am one of those people that was in a corral that was faster than I may have been ready for. But I was going for 3:30 and for the most part kept that pace, at least for the first half. In the second half, I did lose it. So I think that just comes with doing a marathon. And then many runners that felt it was a little bit too crowded, but it's the second largest marathon in the world. So I think the only way that maybe they can do that is if they can spread out the waves a little bit more. And then again, in addition to widening the streets, but overall, I was very happy with the way that the race was organized. Again, maybe the finish line would be something else where they can kind of be a little bit emphasize that, because I think many people were emphasizing at the expo what time to get there and the corral start time. I think they should definitely remind runners about the finish as well. So what's next for me? I've already signed up for my second marathon. That's going to be the Los Angeles Marathon. It is a race that I told myself I would never do. It's a hilly course, roughly 1,000 feet of elevation gain. I used to live in Los Angeles and Silver Lake and Los Feliz, those hills. I just knew, like, I'm never going to do this race. Never, never, never. And here I am. And the reason for that, a couple of reasons, is the fact that it's local. I think that I didn't train as hard for the Paris Marathon. I didn't push my body to its extreme because I was fearful of getting injured. Being that it is a race across Europe, last thing I wanted was to arrive in Europe with an injury and not being able to race. So there are definitely moments where I kept it easy. I didn't run as many hard tempo runs throughout the training period. I think the first 8 weeks or so were pretty much all at easy pace. I really wanted to build up that aerobic base, which ended up working out for the half marathon, as well as I mentioned, running a pretty great first 15 to 18 miles. But keeping that fast of a pace, I should have done more tempo runs throughout the whole thing rather than really focusing on tempo runs in the last month or so. Additionally, I wanted to do Los Angeles because I can push myself further, and if for whatever reason I do get hurt, hopefully I don't, but if I do, it's not a major deal. It's a race that I'm not traveling for too far, only like 35 miles away from it. And then same thing in terms of sightseeing. I don't have to worry about sightseeing or doing too much with my feet before the race. I can definitely take that entire week nice and easy before the marathon. So looking forward to the LA Marathon. And I think that another reason why is, while it is considered a challenging course, I'm hoping to get a really good time with that. We'll see how my stride predicts as I get closer to that, but I'm hoping to get a good time. And if I do a good time with that, that means that other marathons should be a little bit easier. So looking forward to that. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions on the race, please drop them in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.